Mr. Chand, friends, thank you for having me to come and speak to you about the RTI and in the context of the concept of e-governance. E-governance is a vital concept in the development process of our country. Our country is also extremely well placed because of advances in our technology in the last 20 years or so to be able to take the lead in this aspect of governance. But e-governance is never really going to be effective unless it is also tied in very closely and very intimately with the right to information. Similarly, the right to information which we now have in our country and about which so much is being written in the newspapers, and many of you here I see are actual participants in that whole process, is something which is not going to be entirely successful. In fact, it could be even doomed to failure if it is not tied very closely to the concept of e-governance. And in this context, without taking too much of your time, I will invite your attention to one clause of the Right to Information Act, a single clause, but I think it's most important, and that is Section 4. I'll read this out to you because I think it's important. I've, of course, done this exercise before reading this out to others, but I think it's important for every audience to actually understand what this is. Section 4.1 says, every public authority shall, and what is a public authority? I'll define that for you after this, maintain all its records, mind you, all its records, duly catalogued and indexed in a manner and the form which facilitates the right to information under this Act, and ensure that all records that are appropriate to be computerized are within a reasonable time and subject to availability of resources computerized and connected through a network all over the country on different systems so that access to such records is facilitated. This is a very sweeping mandate of a legislation of our Parliament. It does not allow for part of the record or some records or some appropriate records. It talks in terms of all records and all of them being actually networked, accessible through a network across the country, and of course that would mean all over the world. The only limitations are at the appropriate time and subject to availability of finances. Now, thanks to the fact that government is already investing heavily with the assistance of the World Bank on the concept of e-governance, the Department of Information Technology, of course, the spokesman of which is here with us, is already making much headway in terms of introducing e-governance in all the departments. So there is no real budgetary limitation, provided RTI can be tied in with the whole concept of e-governance. And it is my case before you that the two have to go together. One without the other is like a husband without a wife, or one leg without another. They're both very much a part of this whole system. Because by accessing the information, you will actually make that information real. And therefore you will make e-governance real. It's not simply, therefore, a question of workflows. It's a question of records being made accessible. And therefore, sitting anywhere in the world, if one wants to know what is happening in a particular department in the government on the government of the state or the government of the union, then it should be available to anyone to know. We have had cases coming in of people actually inquiring as to how many people are the ration card holders in a particular neighborhood in Delhi. And the department is hard put to it to actually provide that information. Whereas under the Act, under the law, that information is supposed to be public information and accessible and available to the public. Let me go on from this 4.1a, which I have quoted to you, to 4.1b. It talks of publish within 120 days from the enactment of this Act the particulars of the organization, functions and duties, powers and duties of its officers and employees, procedure followed in the decision-making process, including channels of supervision and accountability, the norms set by it for the discharge of its functions. So you can hold anyone to account on the basis of information that is supposed to have been provided suo motu. Rules, regulations, instructions, manuals, and records held by it or under its control or used by its employees for discharging its functions, and a statement of the categories of documents that are held by it or under its control. So that if you're looking for any particular document, all you need is to scan the web, and you'll be able to find the category of documents there and then apply to actually see those documents. The particulars of any arrangement that exists for consultation with or representation by the members of the public in relation to the formulation of its policy or implementation thereof, a statement of the boards, council, committees, and other bodies consisting of two or more persons constituted as its part or for the purpose of its advice, and so on, a directory of its officers and employees, the monthly remuneration received by each of its officers and employees, including the system of compensation as provided in its regulations, the budget allocated to each of its agencies, indicating the particulars of all plans, proposed expenditures, and reports on disbursements made, the manner of execution of subsidy programs, including the amounts allocated and the details of beneficiaries of such programs, particulars of recipients of concessions, permits, or authorizations granted by it, details in respect of the information available to or held by it, reduced in an electronic form, and the particulars of facilities available to citizens for obtaining information, including the working hours of a library or reading room if maintained for public use, names, designations, or other particulars of public information officers, such other information as may be prescribed. Now you can imagine that this alone is quite exhaustive, but it goes on from there. Under Section 41C, publish all relevant facts while formulating important policies or announcing the decisions which affect the public, and provide reasons for its administrative or quasi-judicial decisions to affected persons. An example of the last case would be, for example, demolition of slums and jhopris in Delhi. Now, this has been a problem with many people. The courts have held that such demolition should not take place unless rehabilitation policies have also been put in place. But what has been happening is that many people are displaced without any rehabilitation policy. Under this law, this should all be on the website, that so-and-so areas are to be demolished, and if they're demolished, then this is the area to which they should go. And to do so, they should please apply. We have hundreds of cases coming to us where this is not being done. These are all ways of improving the quality of life in our neighborhoods, in our country, in our cities, which is also the objective of bringing about e-governance. I'll just end by describing to you what a public... But before I do that, let me also point out that it is mandated for government under Section 4.2. It should be a constant endeavor of every public authority to take steps in accordance with the requirements of Clause B of subsection 1, which I just read out to you, to provide as much information suo motu to the public at regular intervals through various means of communication, including internet, so that the public have minimum resort to the use of this act to obtain information. And that is why I say, that if this act is to succeed, if the expectations that it has aroused are ready to be fulfilled, it must cleave to Section 4.1 and 4.2, and the method of making it so cleave is integrating these clauses into the whole concept and endeavor of the right to information. And coming back to what I was saying in conclusion, a public authority